The American Psychological Association and the Mayo Clinic have adopted jointly several steps in bouncing back and becoming more resilient. They call it the road to resilience. Some of those steps are making connections, being able to form relationships with other people, and developing a broadly based support system. Those people with broad support systems tend to be more resilient and tend to cope better with crises, whereas those who are isolated, who have fewer support systems, are more likely to solve problems poorly, to come up with maladaptive solutions, and to handle life's traumas and vicissitudes less effectively. That is why, for one reason, that the highest suicide rate among any age group in our country is among the elderly. They tend to have lost many friends. They tend to have fewer support systems. Perhaps they've moved away from where they grew up and where they lived all their lives into a condominium on Miami Beach, perhaps. And as a result, when they lose their spouse, they're isolated. And that isolation doesn't lead to effective problem solving or to effective coping. Having the connections, fostering support systems, and the broadening of support systems can help them cope more effectively. It's so important also that the individual learns how to avoid viewing a crisis or crises as insurmountable. That learned helplessness is not an effective way of coping. That's the antithesis of resilience. Those people who believe that they can cope, who view a crisis as a temporary phenomenon that can be overcome and that might actually turn out to be beneficial or to strengthen the individual, is likely to cope better. Who was it that said, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger"? That's the attitude I'm talking about. It's also important in the road to resilience to be able to accept that change is a part of living rather than a loss or a trauma. Those people who not only recognize but embrace change, who cope with it well, who learn from it and take advantage of the opportunities that it offers, not only become more and more resilient, but also cope better and better with the inevitable crises and losses in their lives. And we can see that happening all the time. Small examples of it are those people who take advantage or learn how to utilize the new technologies instead of resisting them, feeling that they're just examples of how the world is going to hell in a handbasket and so forth. The road to resilience involves goal setting. It's really important to help people to focus on the goals that they would like to obtain, planning for those goals, and taking steps gradually to move toward them. People who have goals and who pursue those goals effectively are more likely to embrace life and to embrace change. And then those who are capable of and actually follow through with taking decisive action based on their goals and based on their planning and their own personal capabilities and belief in those capabilities are far more likely to be resilient than those who waffle, who are not capable of taking decisive action, and who procrastinate, although not all procrastination should be viewed as maladaptive or dysfunctional. Other characteristics of the road to resiliency involve looking for self-discovery opportunities. How can I learn more about myself from this crisis? How can I help others to learn about themselves from the crisis, and in the process make myself and them stronger, more knowledgeable, and most importantly, more insightful. Those who nurture a positive self-perception are on the road to resilience as well. I believe that I can cope. I see evidence of my coping. I am confident in my problem solving. I can move ahead. I have a positive view of who I am as a person and of myself as a problem solver. It's also important on the road to resilience to keep things in perspective. It's easy to pour fuel on the flames of anger, on the flames of resentment, on the flames of overreaction. In fact, when one takes a situation or circumstance, an environmental stimulus, and blows it way out of proportion, we call that delusional. It's really important for resilience to avoid delusional thinking and to put traumas and life stressors into perspective. Another way to think about that is to avoid adjustment disorders. Adjustment disorders, by definition, involve blowing things out of proportion emotionally and not being able to keep them in appropriate perspective for one reason or another. Then maintaining a hopeful outlook, having optimism is critical, and taking good care of oneself. And in my view, taking good care of oneself is perhaps the most important and first step in coping with trauma and crisis. I call that the airline principle. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. As a speaker and as a psychologist, I've had the opportunity to travel a great deal, sometimes for pleasure and vacation, sometimes for work-related purposes and to do presentations. And during that travel, or in that travel, most of the time I fly, usually on planes. And when I fly, and I've flown hundreds, maybe thousands of times at this point, and it never ceases to amaze me, some of the useless information that the airlines present at the beginning of the flight, before the plane takes off. Things like how to buckle your seatbelt. Now, I suppose if I'd never flown before and never ridden in a car before and never seen a seatbelt before, that might be useful information. But I kind of know that you put the buckle into the clip and how you unbuckle it and so forth after a few hundred times of hearing about that. There are many other things that they say in that safety spiel that are relatively useless bits of information. Like if we have a crash landing over water, then reach under your seat and pull out the personal flotation device. And then they tell you how to put it on and how to operate it. And I'm thinking, if we have a crash landing over water, I'm going to reach under my seat and kiss my rear end goodbye. But there is something that they tell you in that safety spiel that's very valuable. And that is that if the pressure in the cabin starts to drop and there's not enough oxygen for you to breathe, and by the way, I have become very attached to oxygen for some reason, there's not enough oxygen for you to breathe, then this handy-dandy little mask falls down in front of your face. And I'm thinking, what a good idea. Who thought about that? I would like to give them a big kiss. This is great. So the mask falls down in front of your face, and then they tell you the dangerous part. Pull the mask to the full extent of the tubing. And I'm thinking, I hope if that ever happens, I don't rip the thing out of the ceiling and have to use somebody else's mask. At any rate, They tell you that, and then they tell you how to put on the mask, and then they tell you the airline principle. And that airline principle is, if you're traveling with companions or with other passengers who need help in securing their masks, put your mask on first. Now, why do they tell you to do such a patently selfish thing? Well, it's pretty clear. If you don't have enough oxygen, if you black out, if your judgment and perceptions are distorted as a result of the decreased cabin pressure, you're not going to be able to help anybody else effectively. And that's so important for everyone when they're coping with stressors or traumas or grief. And it's especially important for people in helping professions as well, to recognize that we must take care of ourselves first. One of the first things that the Red Cross teaches in its disaster mental health training is that you take care of the helpers before you take care of those who need help, because once the helpers break down, then no help is available. So it's really important for us to remember to take good care of ourselves as part of the development and maintenance of resilience. At this point, we're going to take a brief break, and I'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back from our brief break. I'd like to tell you a story now about fostering resilience and how one individual who decides to engage in a resilience fostering or resilience building exercise with a group of individuals can then spread that exercise to an entire community, and we'll see one of the or some of the effects of that spreading of resilience. A teacher in New York decided to honor each of her seniors in high school by telling them the difference that each of them had made. She called each student to the front of the class one at a time. First, she told each of them how they had made a difference to her and to the class. She presented each one of them with a blue ribbon imprinted with gold letters which read, "Who I am makes a difference." Afterwards, the teacher decided to do a class project to see what kind of impact recognition would have on a whole community. She gave each student 3 more blue ribbons and instructed them to go out and to spread this acknowledgement ceremony. Then they were to follow up on the results, see who honored whom, and report to the class in about a week. One of the boys in the class went to a junior executive in a nearby company and honored him for helping him with his career planning. He gave him a blue ribbon and put it on his shirt. Then he gave him 2 extra ribbons and said, "We're doing a class project on recognition, and we'd like for you to go out, find someone to honor, and give them a blue ribbon." Later that day, the junior executive went in to see his boss, who had a reputation of being kind of a grouchy fellow. He told him that he deeply admired him for being a creative genius. The boss seemed very surprised. The junior executive asked him if he would accept the gift of the blue ribbon and give him permission to put it on. The boss said, "Well, sure." The junior executive took one of the blue ribbons and placed it right on his boss's jacket above his heart. And then he asked, offering him the last ribbon, "Would you take this extra ribbon and pass it on by honoring somebody else?" The teenager who gave me these is doing a school project, and we want to keep this ribbon ceremony going and see how it affects people. That night, the boss came home and sat down with his 14-year-old son. He said, "The most incredible thing happened to me today. I was in my office and one of my employees came in and told me he admired me and gave me a blue ribbon for being a creative genius. Imagine, he thinks I'm a creative genius. Then he put a blue ribbon on me that says, "Who I am makes a difference." He gave me an extra ribbon and asked me to find somebody else to honor. As I was driving home tonight, I started thinking about who I would honor with this ribbon, and I thought about you. I want to honor you. My days are hectic, and when I come home, I don't pay a lot of attention to you. I yell at you for not getting good enough grades or for your messy bedroom. Somehow tonight, I just wanted to sit here and, well, just let you know that you do make a difference to me. Besides your mother, you're the most important person in my life. You're a great kid, and I love you. The startled boy started to sob and sob uncontrollably, and he couldn't stop crying. His whole body shook. He looked up at his father and said through his tears, "Dad, earlier tonight I sat in my room and wrote a letter to you and Mom explaining why I had taken my life, and I asked you to forgive me. I was going to commit suicide tonight after you were asleep. I just didn't think that you cared at all. The letter is upstairs. I don't think I'll need it after all." His father walked upstairs and found a heartfelt letter full of anguish and pain. The boss went back to work, a changed man. He was no longer a grouch, but made sure to let all of his employees know that they made a difference to him. The junior executive helped many other young people with career planning, one being the boss's son, and he never forgot to let them know that they made a difference in his life. In addition, the young man and his classmates learned a valuable lesson. Who you are does make a difference.